So you want to shoot documentary photography. Well, documentary photography has rules, and in this video I'm going to go over what they are, why they're important, where they're applicable, and when you should break them. First things first, the main rule, the one that a lot of the other rules fall under, is that your work must be authentic. In documentary photography, you are making a visual record of reality, and in that there is no room for errors or for lies or for mistruths or for any bending of what that reality actually is. You have to take authentic images that tell an authentic story, and in your editing and your processing, you've got to go through a process that preserves the authenticity, and you've got to do all that for that work to be classed as a credible piece of documentary work. So there's a lot of different parts to that. Let's break it down. So how do you take authentic images? The answer to this question kind of boils down to what kind of documentary project you're shooting. If you're shooting a historic documentary, a story that has already happened, then you've got to do your research. You've got to make sure that your facts are 100% right, because if you get something wrong, then your images are going to end up telling a lie, whether intentionally or unintentionally, doesn't matter. You need to tell the full truth in order for it to be authentic. Now, if you're telling a live story, a story that is unfolding as you're shooting it, then no amount of research is ever going to help you on that, because you can't research it, it's not happened yet. So you've got to really be present in the moment. You've got to be aware of everything that's happening around you, all of your surroundings, and you've got to be really conscious of the whole situation you're in to make sure you are shooting those poignant moments and capturing the important elements of that story as it unfolds. So that's past and present. If you can document the future, I want to see it. Documentary photography is storytelling, so there's a lot more to it than just taking photos. Not only do you have to make them look good, but you need to make sure that the story is wholly authentic. If you're shooting a historic documentary, a story that has already happened, then research is going to be a big part of that, but the rest falls down to you. We all have opinions and views and biases, and it's so easy to inject these into the work that you create, into the photos that you take. But in documentary photography, that you've got to consciously avoid doing that, because the second you do impart your own biases and views and opinions into the work, whether knowingly or unknowingly, intentionally or unintentionally, you are destroying the authenticity of the work as a documentary piece. Because at that point, you're no longer documenting the thing, you're documenting your take and your views on the thing. So it's really important that you avoid injecting yourself into the work as a documentary photographer. Honestly, this is a really tricky rule to follow, because it's so easy to write your own biases and views onto the images you make, completely unknowingly, because you're human. It's a natural thing to do. You have to really understand the subject and the story that you're documenting, whilst simultaneously really understanding yourself and your own views and biases, so that you can keep the two separate, and you've got to shoot consciously with them in mind to avoid injecting your own views onto the images. So you've got to really be mentally on it and really conscious about the work that you're making, because as a documentary photographer, it is your job to document the reality, not your opinion on the reality. This is especially relevant when you're documenting something that you don't agree with. For example, say a protest that goes against your beliefs. You've got the ability to take photos of that protest and make those people and that cause look foul. You can paint them in whatever light you want, and you could really show them up to be something that you see that maybe isn't the reality. But that wouldn't be documentary work. That wouldn't be documentary photography. You have to be completely objective. Remove yourself entirely from the images. Let the story tell itself. If the thing is bad, then it will show itself up. Don't try and write the story the way you see it. Let the story write itself through the lens. Just be the medium, not the writer. Then it's on to processing. So you've got your photos, you've taken the shots, and now you need to edit them. But it's documentary photography, so naturally this process, again, has rules. Luckily, they're quite simple and quite easy to follow, so let's get into that. The goals of documentary photography are honesty, authenticity, and truth. So To boil it down, any editing and processing that moves your images closer towards those things is good, and anything that moves them further away is bad. So generally speaking, corrections are fine, but photo manipulation is a no-go. So for an example, if the photo you've took is darker than the scene was in person, then it's a good thing to add some light to pull the image closer to how the scene was actually seen, because that's more authentic, that's more truthful. If you shot with the wrong white balance and your image is too warm, then it's perfectly good to cool the image down, to move it closer to what the scene was actually like, because that's more truthful, it's more authentic. But if you are going to manipulate, say there is something in the background that doesn't quite look too pretty and you remove it, you're moving the image further away from the truth and making it less authentic, and that in documentary photography is not the way to go. That's to be avoided at all costs. I am going to make a video at some point in depth on the editing process of documentary photography, what's okay and what isn't, but I'll do that at another time, so keep an eye out for that. So if you follow these rules, you should be creating some honest and good documentary photography. So that's that, right? No, it's documentary photography, so it doesn't just end there, it goes on forever. Once you've got your images, you then need to go on to presentation, and you need to figure out how they're going to be shown and how they're going to be seen. So first off is the image selection. Now you can do this before you edit, that's fine. I personally find that editing all of the potential images first and then making the selection after is more effective. You've got a wider, more improved pool to pick from, but however works for you. So yeah, first is image selection. You've got to pick which images to be seen and which images to omit and get rid of and not be seen. Different images will tell different parts of the story, and they'll all tell it differently. So when it comes to making your selection, it's your job as a documentary photographer to choose a selection of images that are the most effective, efficient, honest and whole in their storytelling. Then when you have your selection, you need to decide how to display them, how to present them, how are they going to be seen. Pretty much any form that you can think of can work for documentary photography. Photo books, scattergraphs, big poster things like this, installations, all of it can work, but as a documentary photographer, it's your job to pick the most effective form of presentation. The form of presentation that best communicates and complements the story that you've captured. Because there's no point capturing this incredible, authentic story and then choosing a method of display that doesn't tell that story as well as it can. It's a waste of a project, it's a waste of photos. And then there's context. So documentary photography is all about storytelling, but that doesn't mean that the viewer can immediately see and understand the story that those photos are trying to tell. Stories are deep, photos are deep, but aren't always deep on the surface at first glance. So as a documentary photographer, you have to choose the context, the right amount, the right depth, the right form, the right placement. You have to pick what information goes in front of the viewer so that they've got the necessary information to be able to view the work through the right eyes and understand the story that your images are holding and telling. This context could be a very small caption just to add some information, or it could be a whole book's worth. But as a documentary photographer, this is the decision you need to make, and this is what you need to figure out about your project. So those are the main base rules and guides for documentary photography. But everything we've discussed so far goes on the assumption that your documentary work is covering something physical, something tangible, real, like events or people. But what if you're documenting something more conceptual, something you can't touch and see, like emotions or feelings, for example? Well, this is where it gets to breaking the rules, because let's say you're documenting some heightened emotion, a period of grief, for example. You could take those photos and go through all the processes and follow all the rules we've discussed before, but those images might not be able to communicate the depth and extent of those feelings with true authenticity and efficiency. It might not be able to truly communicate those feelings. So it's at that point that you look at like the rules on editing, for example, and perhaps then photo manipulation could be a good tool in getting closer to the truth, moving that image closer to that feeling and becoming more authentic. It kind of gets a bit philosophical when you get to these grounds, because you've got to spend some time with yourself thinking about what truth means in the context of your project and the story that you're trying to tell. Because if a traditionally documentary photo wouldn't be the best communication of the feeling, for example, then is that really the most efficient form of documentary for that kind of project? I would argue not. I would argue that a more artistic and creative approach would be a better representation of that emotion, and thus would be a more authentic form of documentary in that case. So you can certainly break the rules, but the situations in which you do so are relatively rare in the documentary world. Basically what I'm saying is, in documentary photography, the aim is truth and authenticity. The aim is to tell that story as honestly as you can, and if breaking any of the rules we've gone over would aid you in doing that, then that is the right thing to do. So that's the basic rules of documentary photography broken down. So now you're armed to go out there and take some documentary photographs for yourself. So get shooting, just make it authentic.